Have you ever walked into a room and felt it almost immediately? That prickling sensation on the back of your neck, a subtle chill that has nothing to do with the thermostat, a quiet certainty that the air itself holds a memory, or perhaps a secret that doesn't quite belong to you. It's that fleeting moment, isn't it, when the ordinary feels just a little off. When the perfectly normal surroundings seem to hum with an almost imperceptible dissonance, a silent chord struck somewhere beyond our usual hearing. It's the kind of feeling that settles deep, long before your mind can even begin to rationalize it, a true whisper from the unseen, telling you that this particular space, right here, right now, carries with it something beyond explanation. And what if that space was a hotel room? Not just any hotel room, mind you, but one perched on the 13th floor, a number already steeped in its own strange lore, tucked away in a grand old building that has seen countless lives pass through its polished halls and behind its heavy, echoing doors. It was late, much later than I usually prefer to check into a hotel, the kind of hour when the lobby lights are dimmed just so, and the chatter of the day has long faded, leaving behind only a hushed stillness that feels almost anticipatory. The city outside hummed with its own nocturnal symphony, a distant, muffled orchestra of life. But inside, in the polished marble and hushed tones of the reception area, there was a profound quietude. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes and a practiced, weary smile, handed me a key card, its plastic cool against my fingertips, and murmured the room number, 1307. 13. It wasn't a number I actively avoided, not really, but it always made me pause just for a fleeting second, a tiny, almost superstitious flicker in the back of my mind. A habit, I suppose, more than a genuine fear. He gestured towards the elevators, their brass doors gleaming faintly in the subdued lighting, and with a polite nod, I made my way towards them, my carry-on bag rolling softly behind me. The elevator ride up was uneventful, a smooth ascent punctuated only by the soft ding as we passed each floor. There were a few other guests, silent strangers sharing the confined space, their faces illuminated briefly by the changing numbers above the door. They exited on their respective floors, their footsteps fading down carpeted hallways until it was just me. The elevator paused, the doors slid open with a gentle sigh, revealing a corridor that stretched out before me, bathed in the soft, golden glow of wall sconces. It was a perfectly normal hotel hallway, plush carpet muffling any sound, identical doors lining either side, each one a closed world. Yet as I stepped out, a subtle shift in the air, a faint coolness seemed to greet me. It wasn't unpleasant, not exactly, just different. A change in pressure, perhaps, or merely the late hour playing tricks on my senses. I shrugged it off, or tried to, telling myself it was nothing, just the quiet of the night, the way sounds carry differently when the world around you is asleep. Room 1307. I found it easily enough, nestled near the end of the hall away from the elevators, offering a promise of quiet. I slid the key card into the slot, waited for the green light, and pushed the heavy door open. The room was exactly as I'd imagined, a standard hotel room, spacious enough, with a large king-sized bed, a small desk by the window, and a television mounted on the wall. The decor was neutral, tasteful even, with muted blues and a lamp shedding a soft, inviting glow near the armchair. Everything seemed utterly ordinary, impeccably clean, and frankly, a welcome sight after a long day of travel. I dropped my bag with a soft thud, walked over to the window and pulled back the heavy curtains. The city lights twinkled below, a vast, sparkling tapestry stretching out to the dark horizon. It was a beautiful view, undeniably so. But then, as I stood there gazing out at the miniature world, that feeling returned. It was a whisper, a barely there sensation, like someone had just breathed very softly near my ear. Not threatening, not yet, but present. It felt as if the air in this particular room had a different quality to it, a subtle thickness, a weight that wasn't physical. I turned away from the window, trying to pinpoint the source or even just the nature of this strange impression. Was it the silence? No, not quite silence, but a specific kind of quiet, a quiet that seemed to absorb sound rather than just lack it, a quiet that felt listening. I walked over to the bed, smoothed down the duvet, and sat on the edge, testing the mattress. It was firm, comfortable. I reached for my phone, scrolling through messages, trying to distract myself to shake off this odd feeling. But it persisted, a low hum beneath my thoughts. I looked around the room again, more intently this time. The paintings on the walls, innocuous landscapes. The clock radio glowing softly with the time. The coffee maker on the small stand. All utterly normal. Yet my gaze kept drifting back to the space above the bed, where a large, framed abstract print hung. It depicted swirling blues and like a storm seen from afar, or perhaps a vast, deep ocean. Nothing overtly creepy, yet for some reason, my eyes lingered on it longer than felt natural. It wasn't the image itself, I realized, but the way it seemed to hang, almost imperceptibly askew by the smallest degree. A trick of the light, I told myself. Or perhaps it was just my weary mind seeking something, anything, to latch onto for this vague unease. I decided to unpack a few things, hoping the mundane task would ground me. As I opened my suitcase and began to fold a shirt, I heard it, a faint scraping sound. It seemed to come from the wall directly behind the headboard, just where that painting hung. A soft, repetitive scratch like fingernails lightly dragging across plaster, or perhaps something even smaller like a mouse. I paused, my hands still, listening intently. The sound stopped. My breath hitched just for a moment. It's an old building, I reasoned. Hotels have pipes, ventilation systems, settling noises. It's entirely normal. But then it wasn't just the sound itself, it was the specific quality of it, the way it had seemed to hesitate, to listen for my reaction before stopping. That was the truly unsettling part. I stood up slowly and walked towards the wall, my hand instinctively reaching out, not quite touching it. The wall felt solid, cool beneath my fingers. Nothing seemed out of place. I leaned in closer, straining to hear, but there was only the profound, almost oppressive quiet of the room. It was then that I noticed a very faint, almost imperceptible scent in the air. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was distinct. A faint, sweet smell like old potpourri or dried flowers, but with an underlying hint of something else, something metallic, almost like old coins or perhaps dust, but a very specific, ancient kind of dust. It was fleeting, elusive, barely there, and I wondered if I was simply imagining it, my senses heightened by the strange atmosphere. I decided a shower would do me good, washing away the travel fatigue and perhaps this strange, lingering feeling. The bathroom was spotless, modern fixtures gleaming under the bright lights. I turned on the water, letting the steam fill the small space, and as I stepped under the warm spray for a few blessed minutes, the odd sensation seemed to recede. The mundane comfort of hot water was a welcome distraction, a familiar anchor in a sea of subtle unease. But even then, at the back of my mind, the image of that slightly askew painting and the memory of that faint scraping sound lingered like faint afterimages. Once I was dried and dressed in my pajamas, the room felt different again. The air seemed cooler, despite the warmth of the shower. I turned off the harsh bathroom light, leaving only the soft glow of the bedside lamp. The abstract painting above the bed now seemed to draw my eye even more. Was it my imagination, or did it seem even more askew now? Just a fraction of an inch, perhaps, but enough to make my inner sense of order prickle. I walked over to it, stood on my tiptoes, and carefully adjusted it, nudging it until it was perfectly straight. As my fingers brushed against the frame, I felt a faint vibration, a tiny, almost imperceptible hum that quickly faded. Or did it? Was it just the building settling, or a distant machine, or was it something else? I settled into bed, pulling the crisp white sheets up to my chin. The mattress was comfortable, the pillows soft. I picked up my book, a thrilling mystery, hopping to lose myself in its pages and finally shake off this persistent feeling. But the words on the page seemed to blur, my mind wandering back to the room itself. The silence now felt less peaceful and more profound, almost like a heavy blanket pressing down. Every subtle creak of the old building, every distant city hum, seemed taking on a new, unsettling significance. I found myself listening, really listening to the sounds that weren't there, to the absence of sound that felt somehow louder than any noise. My eyes kept drifting towards the door, then to the window, then back to the painting above the bed. That faint, sweet metallic scent seemed to return, just a breath of it, and then it was gone, leaving me wondering if it had been there at all. I tried to focus on the story in my hands, a tale of a detective chasing a phantom, but my own phantom was right here in this room, a subtle, unshakable presence that had no name, no form, but was undeniably there. It must have been a trick of the light, I mused, or perhaps the way the building settled at night. Hotels are old, full of history, full of stories, and sometimes those stories leave faint echoes, don't they? Like residual energy, a faint imprint left behind by countless souls who have passed through these rooms, each with their own hopes and fears and secrets. Room 1307. 13. It's just a number, I told myself, a sequence of digits. But then, why did this particular room feel so heavy? So observant, as if it weren't just a space, but an entity quietly taking stock of my presence within its walls. I finally put my book down, unable to concentrate. Sleep felt impossibly far away despite my exhaustion. I closed my eyes, trying to conjure images of calm, of serene landscapes, of anything but the room around me. But the moment my eyes shut, I felt it more intensely, a profound sense of being watched. Not in a menacing way, not with overt hostility, but with an unsettling, almost curiosity. It was a cold gaze, not a burning one. It was as if something in the room was simply observing, waiting. My eyelids fluttered open and I stared up at the ceiling, illuminated faintly by the bedside lamp. Nothing. Of course, nothing. But the feeling was so vivid, so undeniable that it was hard to dismiss. I reached for the television remote, thinking a little background noise might break the spell. The screen flickered to life, showing a late-night talk show. The sound of human voices, even artificial ones, was a small comfort, a thin barrier against the oppressive quiet. I kept the volume low, almost a whisper, just enough to fill the space without being intrusive. As the show played, my gaze idly fell upon the small minibar fridge tucked away in a cabinet beneath the television. It was silent, its small motor not humming, which was unusual for hotel fridges. I remembered seeing a similar model in another hotel once, and it had always had a faint, almost imperceptible whir. This one was utterly still. I wondered if it was even working. A small detail, easily overlooked, yet in my heightened state, it seemed to contribute to the overall strangeness. Everything felt a little too quiet, a little too still. I tried to rationalize it again. Perhaps it was just the altitude, I thought, a change in air pressure making me feel lightheaded, or the slight dehydration from travel. Maybe I was just overtired, my imagination working overtime in the quiet hours of the night. It was a perfectly logical explanation, the kind of reasoning my waking, rational mind would usually cling to. But deep down, a small, persistent voice whispered back, "No, this is different." I closed my eyes again, the soft murmur of the television a distant drone. I tried to focus on my breathing, slow and even, attempting to guide myself towards sleep. But as I lay there on the very edge of consciousness, I started to hear things that weren't there, or perhaps things that were there but incredibly faint. A soft, rustling sound like old paper being gently shifted. Then a subtle scratching, almost like fine grit being moved across a surface. It seemed to come from all around me, swirling in the air but never quite settling into a definitive source. It was like a symphony of almost sounds, a cacophony of quiet. I opened my eyes, a sense of quiet dread coiling in my stomach. The room was still, the television still murmuring. Everything appeared exactly as it had before, yet the feeling of presence had intensified. It felt closer now, more focused, as if whatever was in the room had shifted, had drawn nearer to the bed. I felt a distinct chill, a cold spot on my left side, even though the room temperature seemed perfectly normal. I pulled the duvet, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I found myself staring at the closed bathroom door, then at the main entrance door, as if expecting something to appear, to materialize from the shadows. My gaze drifted back to the abstract painting above the bed. It still seemed perfectly straight as I had left it. But then, as I watched, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me, I saw it. The faintest ripple, a shiver, seemed to pass through the canvas, like a breath or a very gentle gust of wind, but the room was perfectly still. The colors on the painting seemed to deepen for a fraction of a second, the blues becoming more profound, the more somber, before returning to their original hues. It was so subtle, so brief, that I instantly doubted my own perception. Just tired eyes, I told myself. Imagination. But the chill on my left side remained, a cold hand on my arm, though there was nothing there. I decided I couldn't lie there any longer. I needed to move to break this silent vigil. I slowly sat up, pushing myself against the headboard, feeling the firm support behind me. I reached for the lamp on the bedside table and flicked it on, bathing the room in a brighter, more reassuring light. The sudden brightness seemed to dissipate some of the oppressive feeling, making the shadows recede. The painting above the bed looked utterly normal now, static and unmoving. The silence seemed less profound, more like the natural quiet of a sleeping building. I reached for my phone, scrolling through social media, looking for anything to anchor me back to the mundane world. Friends' updates, silly videos, news headlines, all the trivialities of daily life. It was a necessary distraction, a lifeline to the ordinary. As I scrolled, I noticed a faint warmth emanating from the wall near my head. I pressed my palm against it. It was distinct, a patch of warmth, oddly localized just where my head had been resting. It wasn't a pipe, I knew, as that wall separated my room from the hallway, not another heated room. It was baffling. A warm spot in a cool room. It felt almost like residual heat, as if someone had been leaning there very recently. My mind immediately jumped to the scraping sound, the vague scent, the feeling of being watched. Could it be connected? I got out of bed, feeling a sudden surge of restlessness. I walked to the window again, peering out at the city below. The lights still twinkled, indifferent to the subtle drama playing out in this single room. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my head. This was ridiculous, I told myself. It was just a hotel room, a temporary space, and I was allowing my imagination to run wild. The sleep deprivation, the unfamiliar surroundings, the slight anxiety of travel, it was all contributing to this exaggerated sense of unease. I decided to make a cup of tea, thinking the warm ritual might calm my nerves. I found the electric kettle and the tea bags on the small counter near the minibar. As I filled the kettle with water, my gaze fell upon the small complimentary biscuit packet. It was slightly torn at the corner, as if someone had tried to open it, then thought better of it. A minor detail, truly insignificant, yet in this context, it felt like another small piece of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Who would tear a biscuit packet and not eat it? Perhaps a previous guest, absent-mindedly, or perhaps something else. I watched the kettle boil, the soft bubbling sound a strangely comforting presence in the quiet room. The steam rose, curling gently into the air. As I poured the hot water into the mug, I noticed something else. A faint, barely visible smudge on the rim of the mug, almost like a thumbprint but much fainter, almost ghostly. I rubbed at it with my finger, and it disappeared immediately. It was probably just a water stain, or perhaps a faint imperfection in the ceramic. My mind was clearly overreacting, seeing patterns and anomalies where none existed. Yet, the series of tiny, almost imperceptible details continued to accumulate, each one adding a microscopic weight to the unsettling atmosphere. I sat in the armchair, sipping my tea, the warmth of the mug a pleasant counterpoint to the lingering chill I felt. I tried to focus on the steam rising, on the simple comfort of the tea, to force myself to relax. But every nerve ending seemed to be on high alert, tuned to the slightest deviation from the norm. My eyes kept darting around the room, scrutinizing every corner, every shadow. I felt like an unwelcome guest, an intruder in a space that had its own hidden life, its own silent inhabitants. The television was still on, its low murmur a constant presence. A commercial came on, bright and cheerful, utterly at odds with the subdued mood of the room. It was a jarring contrast, making the subtle unease feel even more pronounced. I reached for the remote again, considering turning it off, but then thought better of it. The faint human voices, even from a screen, were a small anchor, a reassurance that I wasn't entirely alone in this quiet, observant room. As I sat there trying to make sense of the accumulating oddities, a new sensation began to prickle at the edges of my awareness. It was a faint pressure, a very subtle weight on the crown of my head, like a light touch or the soft brush of something invisible. I instinctively raised my hand, touching my hair, but there was nothing there. The feeling was fleeting, gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only a heightened sense of bewilderment. What was happening to me? Was I finally losing my mind, conjuring phantom sensations in the dead of night? I tried to recall specific details about the hotel, anything I might have read online before booking. Old, historic, charming, good reviews, all the usual. No mention of anything supernatural, no whispers of hauntings or strange occurrences. Of course not. Hotels don't advertise that sort of thing. But buildings of this age, especially those that have stood for decades, even a century, they have a way of absorbing stories, don't they? Of holding onto the echoes of lives lived within their walls. And on the 13th floor, a number that carries so much symbolic weight, it felt almost destined for something out of the ordinary. I finished my tea, the lukewarm liquid doing little to soothe my frayed nerves. I felt a profound weariness, but sleep still seemed impossible, a distant dream that refused to materialize. The desire to simply close my eyes and drift away was overwhelming, yet the persistent sense of being observed, the faint whispers of unseen presences, kept me tethered to a state of heightened awareness. I felt trapped, not by physical constraints, but by the subtle, psychological grip of the room itself. I stood up and walked to the door, my hand hovering over the lock, checking if it was truly secure. It was, of course, bolted and chained, yet the sense of vulnerability remained. It wasn't about someone getting in. It was about something already being there. The feeling was distinct, clear, though entirely without tangible proof. It was just a feeling, a deep, pervasive knowing that the room was not empty, not truly mine alone. I sat back on the edge of the bed, feeling the cool sheets against my skin. The abstract painting above the headboard seemed to hum with a low, silent energy, its swirling blues and now seeming to shift and undulate in my peripheral vision, even though I knew they were static, painted pigments on canvas. My breath caught in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them wide, trying to clear the vision to banish the unsettling illusion. It worked momentarily. The painting was still fixed. But the impression lingered, a subtle suggestion of movement where there should be none. The strange, almost metallic sweet scent returned, stronger this time, definitely not imaginary. It was like old copper and dried flowers, a curious, unsettling blend. It wasn't overpowering, but it was distinct, undeniably present. It filled the air around me, and I felt a faint dizziness, a slight that made my skin prickle. What was that smell? It felt ancient, like something unearthed, something that had been hidden away for a very long time. I felt a sudden, irrational urge to leave, to simply walk out of the room, descend 13 floors, and stand in the comforting, brightly lit lobby, even if it meant sacrificing a night's sleep. But the hour was too late, and the thought of explaining my sudden, inexplicable departure to a sleepy night clerk felt even more unsettling than staying put. No, I would ride this out. I would conquer this strange, psychological battle within the confines of room 1307. I reached for my phone again, this time to search for anything about the hotel's history, anything that might shed light on this profound sense of unease. I typed in the hotel name, adding haunted and ghost stories. It was a long shot, I knew, but a desperate one. My fingers scrolled quickly, my eyes scanning for any mention, any whisper of the supernatural. Most results were glowing reviews, mentions of its elegance, its classic charm. But then, buried deep in a forum, a single brief comment caught my eye. A user had written almost casually, "Avoid the 13th floor, especially room 1307. Weird vibes." That was it. No explanation, no details, just those three words. Weird vibes. My own words echoing back to me from an anonymous corner of the internet. A cold shiver traced a path down my spine, a shiver that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. It wasn't just my imagination then. Someone else, somewhere else, had felt it too. The undeniable weight, the subtle strangeness, the profound sense of something being off. It validated my experience, and yet it also intensified my fear. Because now it wasn't just me against my own mind. It was me against something real, something shared, something that existed beyond my personal perception. I looked up from my phone, my gaze sweeping over the room. The ordinary objects now seemed imbued with a new, unsettling significance. The slight tear in the biscuit packet, the faint smudge on the mug, the inexplicably warm patch on the wall, the silent minibar fridge, the subtly shifting colors in the painting, the ephemeral scent, the unseen touches. They weren't isolated incidents anymore. They were pieces of a puzzle, fragments of a larger, unseen narrative that this room held within its very structure. I imagined the countless people who had stayed in this room before me. What had they felt? What had they seen? Had they, too, dismissed the subtle hints, rationalizing away the unsettling nuances? Or had some of them, like me, felt that inexplicable weight, that creeping certainty that they were not alone? The thought was strangely comforting in a morbid way. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone in this perception. But it was also terrifying because it meant the weird vibes were not just a figment of my weary mind. They were a consistent characteristic of room 1307. I lay back down, pulling the covers even higher up to my chin, almost instinctively trying to shield myself from the unseen. The television was still on, but its cheerful chatter now felt distant, irrelevant. My focus was entirely on the room, on the subtle shifts in the air, on the profound, watchful silence that permeated every corner. I closed my eyes, but the sensation of being observed was overwhelming. I felt a faint pressure on my eyelids, as if gentle, invisible fingers were trying to pry them open, wanting me to witness something, to see what was truly lurking in the shadows. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting against the sensation. This was it. This was the moment where the subtle gave way to something more direct, more insistent. The scraping sound returned, clearer this time, definitely from the wall behind the bed, a rhythmic, almost deliberate scratching like something trying to claw its way out or perhaps trying to claw its way in. It wasn't a mouse. It was too regular, too purposeful. And then I heard the whisper, faint, barely audible like a breath against my ear but distinct enough to send a jolt of ice through my veins. It wasn't words, not really. More like a soft, elongated sigh, a murmur that seemed to coil around me, emanating from the very fabric of the room. It felt old, infinitely sad, and profoundly lonely. It was a sound that spoke of endless waiting, of unresolved longing, of a presence that had been trapped within these walls for far, far too long. My eyes flew open. The room was still, the television still humming, but the air was thick with it now, with the palpable presence of something unseen. The chill was intense, a pervasive cold that seeped into my bones, making my teeth chatter faintly. The sweet metallic scent was stronger too, almost cloying now, making my stomach churn. I pushed myself upright again, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the profound quiet. I stared at the painting above the bed, and as I watched, transfixed, the colors began to shift again, but this time it was more than a ripple. The blues deepened to an almost inky black, the swirled like mist, and in the very center, where a lighter patch of color had been, a distinct swirling void began to form, like a miniature portal, an eye peering out from a storm. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was real. The canvas itself seemed to breathe, to expand and contract subtly, terrifyingly. A single, faint tear, like a tiny crack in the universe, began to form in the center of the swirling void on the painting. It wasn't a tear in the canvas itself, but a visual effect, like a tiny fissure opening in the air, revealing an even deeper darkness beyond. And from that fissure, I felt a subtle pull, a gentle, almost irresistible tug, as if the room itself was breathing in, drawing something towards it, drawing me towards it. I instinctively recoiled, pressing myself further back against the headboard, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The scraping sound intensified, becoming more frantic, more desperate, as if something was indeed trying to escape, or trying to enter through the wall behind me. The whisper grew louder, filling the room, a chorus of long-forgotten sighs, a symphony of sorrow that seemed to emanate from every corner, from beneath the floorboards, from within the very walls. The television suddenly flickered, the screen briefly turning to static, then coming back on, but the image was distorted, wavering, the cheerful commercial replaced by a blurred, shifting image of what looked like an old, sepia-toned photograph, too indistinct to make out clearly. The sound became a garbled mess, a cacophony of white noise mixed with faint, distant cries. It was as if the room itself was rebelling against the intrusion of the mundane, tearing at the fabric of reality. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling, wanting to call someone, anyone, but what would I say? My hotel room is haunted, and the painting is breathing, and there are whispers. It sounded insane, even to me. Yet the reality of it, the undeniable, terrifying reality of the experience, was undeniable. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't imagination. This was room 1307, revealing its true, unsettling nature. The faint, sweet metallic scent now had an acrid undertone, like burning dust, or something even more noxious. It made my eyes water and my throat felt tight, constricted. I felt a profound sense of despair wash over me, a weight that mirrored the whispers, a profound sadness that seemed to permeate the very air I was breathing. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a shared sorrow, a profound loneliness that wasn't my own, but had somehow seeped into me from the room, from whatever was trapped within its walls. I looked desperately towards the door, the only exit, but my legs felt heavy, rooted to the bed. The thought of walking through that room, of passing by the active painting, of moving through the thickening air filled with unseen presences and spectral whispers, was paralyzing. I was a prisoner, not of locks and chains, but of an overwhelming psychological dread. The hotel room on the 13th floor had truly claimed me. The faint tear in the painting began to widen, very slowly, very subtly, stretching like a fine spiderweb across the canvas. And within that widening fissure I saw it, or thought I saw it. A glimpse of something dark, something moving, a faint, fleeting impression of an eye or perhaps a mouth, opening in the darkness beyond the painting, silently inviting me, beckoning me deeper into the chilling unknown. It was an impossible sight, a violation of all natural laws, yet it was undeniably there in the quiet, watching room. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs, echoing in my ears, drowning out the television's garbled sounds, the frantic scratching, the whispers. It was a pure primal terror, a fear that stripped away all logic and reason, leaving only the raw, visceral instinct to survive. But how do you survive an unseen foe? How do you escape a room that seems to be alive, that breathes and sighs and watches? I squeezed my eyes shut again, forcing them closed, trying to block out the horrifying sight. But the image was seared into my mind, the expanding fissure, the glimpse of something dark within. And even with my eyes closed, the feeling of presence intensified, the pressure on my eyelids returning, more insistent this time, trying to force them open. It was a silent battle, a war of wills against an unseen force that wanted me to see, to truly witness, whatever horror it held within its confines. The temperature in the room plummeted further, becoming icy cold, so cold that I could almost see my breath, though I knew that was impossible. My entire body trembled, not just from fear, but from the bone-deep chill that had invaded the space. The sweet metallic scent was now overpowering, a sickly sweet stench that filled my nostrils, making me gag. It was the smell of decay, of something long dead, yet still present, still lingering. I opened my eyes, unable to keep them shut any longer. The room was still there, the painting still shifting. The television screen had gone completely dark now, a blank black mirror reflecting the faint light of the bedside lamp, and in its reflection, for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a faint, almost transparent figure standing behind me, just at the edge of my peripheral vision. It was tall, indistinct, a mere shimmer in the darkness. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty space, the quiet room, and the profound, oppressive cold. My gaze fell upon the key card, lying innocently on the bedside table. My ticket out, my escape. But the thought of standing up, of crossing the room, of reaching for it, felt like an insurmountable task. My limbs were heavy, as if weighted down by an invisible force. The whispers grew louder, clearer, still not distinct words, but a cacophony of faint, sorrowful voices, sighing and murmuring, a chorus of despair that seemed to press in on me from all sides. They were all around me, in the air, in the walls, in the very floor beneath my feet. I closed my eyes one last time, defeated, overwhelmed. The chill, the scent, the whispers, the watchful presence, they were all too much. This wasn't just weird vibes. This was a nightmare made real, a waking terror that had chosen room 1307 as its stage and me as its unwilling audience. I could feel the cold seeping deeper into my body, a chilling embrace that promised to lull me into a different kind of sleep, a profound slumber from which there might be no waking. The thought was terrifying, yet oddly, morbidly compelling. The silence that followed after the crescendo of whispers and scratching, was the most profound silence I had ever experienced. It wasn't the absence of sound, but an active, consuming quiet, a void that seemed to swallow all noise, all light, all hope. And in that vast, echoing silence, I felt a singular, cold touch on my hand, resting on the duvet. A faint, almost imperceptible pressure, like the brush of an invisible finger, tracing a silent, chilling message across my skin. The touch lingered, a faint, cold whisper against my skin, sending a jolt of icy fear straight through me, paralyzing me even further. It wasn't menacing, not overtly aggressive, but it was undeniably there. An intimate, chilling contact that all logic, all reason. My breath hitched in my throat, trapped somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. I kept my eyes tightly shut, not daring to open them, convinced that to see what was touching me would be to confront a reality far more terrifying than anything my imagination could conjure. The cold seeped from that touch, spreading slowly, inexorably, up my arm, a profound chill that began to replace the fear with a strange, heavy numbness. The silence in the room, which had seemed so consuming just moments before, now felt thin, almost brittle, as if it were barely holding back a deeper, more profound darkness. I could feel the presence around me, closer now, a palpable weight in the air, pressing down on my chest, making it difficult to draw a full breath. It felt like being submerged in unseen depths, where every movement, every thought was hindered by an invisible resistance. The sweet metallic scent returned, stronger than ever, almost acrid now, filling my lungs with its suffocating perfume, making my head spin with a faint nausea. It was the scent of something ancient, something that had been stagnant for far too long, finally disturbed. A new sensation began to prickle at the edge of my awareness, a subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from the bed itself, a faint, rhythmic tremor like a heartbeat, but too slow, too heavy, too alien to be my own. It wasn't the frantic thrum of a building settling, nor the distant rumble of city life. This was specific, localized, flowing up through the mattress, into my very bones. It felt like the bed, the very foundation beneath me, was slowly, deliberately coming to life, pulsing with a silent, unseen energy. And with each slow pulse, the feeling of being watched intensified, becoming an almost unbearable pressure behind my closed eyelids. A silent, knowing gaze that felt like a drill boring into the depths of my mind. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to simply sit up and flee, but my muscles felt locked, unresponsive. It was as if the room itself held me captive, a silent, unyielding force binding me to the bed. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation, a rational escape route, but every logical thought dissolved into a swirling vortex of fear and confusion. The anonymous forum comment echoed in my mind. Weird vibes. It had been such a mild warning, so understated, almost dismissive. Yet it now felt like a profound prophecy, a terrifying glimpse into the true nature of room 1307. The cold touch on my hand began to move, ever so slowly, retracting, leaving behind a lingering sensation of intense frigidity, as if the air itself had been frozen at that specific spot. Then, a new sensation, a whisper of a brush against my hair, light as a spider's silk, but distinct. It felt like a gentle caress, an almost tender gesture, yet it filled me with an even deeper dread, because its intimacy was profoundly unnatural, a violation of the boundary between the living and whatever lay beyond. It was a gesture that spoke of familiarity, of a connection that I certainly did not share and did not want to. My internal panic escalated, a silent scream building in my chest, desperate to be released. I could feel tears pricking at the corners of my closed eyes, hot against the cold skin of my face, a stark contrast to the glacial atmosphere that permeated the room. The abstract painting above the bed, though unseen, now felt like a living entity, its swirling colors and expanding fissure a gaping maw in the darkness, silently devouring the last vestiges of my sanity. I imagined the dark eye or mouth I had glimpsed within it, now wide open, staring down at me, absorbing every flicker of my fear. Then a new sound, very faint, very close. A soft, almost sigh directly over my head, like someone had just exhaled a lifetime of sorrow. It wasn't a human sigh, not quite. It had an airy, almost ethereal quality to it, like wind passing through dried reeds, but imbued with a profound sadness, a weight of regret that settled over me like a shroud. This was more than just a presence. This was an emotion, raw and exposed, pouring into the room, pouring into me. The rhythmic tremor in the bed intensified, growing stronger, more defined, now feeling less like a heartbeat and more like a gentle, insistent rocking, as if the bed itself was trying to soothe me, or perhaps to lull me into a deeper, more permanent sleep. It was a terrifying paradox, a comforting motion imbued with a chilling purpose. I felt myself being gently, subtly lifted, then lowered, a slow, deliberate undulation that made my stomach lurch with a profound disquiet. I heard the whispers again, but this time they were clearer, almost coalescing into discernible fragments, a chorus of faint, hushed voices. Still not distinct words, but an undeniable murmur of multiple presences, all around me, swirling in the air, pressing in from all sides. They sounded ancient, weary, filled with a longing that transcended time, a desperate yearning for something lost, something forever out of reach. It was a symphony of spectral lamentations, a sorrowful chorus echoing through the very fabric of the room. My own breathing became shallow, ragged, my lungs struggling against the oppressive weight in the air, the suffocating scent, the profound chill. I felt lightheaded, disoriented, my grip on reality starting to fray at the edges. This wasn't just a hotel room with weird vibes. This was a place where the veil between worlds had worn dangerously thin, a conduit for something ancient and sorrowful, a place where the past lingered not just as an echo, but as a living, breathing, profoundly present entity. The faint pressure on my eyelids returned, more insistent now, almost forceful, as if the unseen entity desired me to open my eyes, to witness its full manifestation, to surrender to the visual horror it promised. I fought against it, my muscles straining, my resolve weakening with each passing moment, each chilling sensation, each sorrowful whisper. I knew, with a primal certainty, that to open my eyes would be to irrevocably cross a threshold, to invite a visual terror that would forever scar my perception of reality. Then the rocking motion of the bed intensified, becoming a more pronounced sway, a rhythmic back and forth that made my head loll slightly against the pillow. It was no longer a subtle tremor, but a deliberate movement, as if the bed was being cradled gently, persistently. The intimacy of it, the feeling of being held and rocked by an unseen force, was deeply disturbing, a profound violation of my personal space, an unwanted embrace from the ethereal. It spoke of a desperate need for connection, a longing that was both sorrowful and profoundly unsettling. The whispers began to coalesce even further, fragments of what sounded like a single, elongated name, or perhaps a plea murmured over and over again, softly, insistently in that ancient, sorrowful tone. I couldn't quite make out the syllables, but the intent was clear. It was a calling, a beckoning, a desire to be acknowledged, to be seen, to be remembered. It was a plea from a forgotten soul, trapped within the confines of room 1307, yearning for release or perhaps for companionship. My entire body was trembling now, uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from the sheer, overwhelming terror that had completely consumed me. My heart raced, a frantic drumbeat in my ears, and I could feel the blood pounding in my temples, a dizzying pulse that threatened to overwhelm my senses. The sweet metallic scent had become putrid, cloying, the smell of something utterly stagnant, something that had been decaying in the dark for far too long, finally roused from its slumber. The presence around me became almost tangible, a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed down on every inch of my body, making it impossible to move, to even twitch a finger. I was utterly paralyzed, trapped within a cocoon of invisible terror, held captive by the profoundly sorrowful, deeply unsettling entity that permeated the very air of room 1307. It felt like being buried alive, not beneath earth, but beneath layers of ancient grief and spectral longing. I felt a profound sense of resignation beginning to settle over me, a terrifying calm replacing the frantic panic, as if my mind, overwhelmed by the relentless onslaught, had finally surrendered. What could I do? Where could I go? The room had become a sentient entity, a living tomb, and I was merely a temporary guest, an unwitting participant in its eternal lament. The thought, though horrifying, brought with it a strange, almost dissociative peace, a detachment from the immediate terror. Then, just as the resignation threatened to fully envelop me, a single, sharp sound cut through the whispers and the rhythmic rocking. A faint, almost imperceptible click. It came from the direction of the main door, the lock, a tiny metallic sound, barely audible, yet in the profound quiet it resonated like a thunderclap. It was the sound of the deadbolt retracting, slowly, deliberately. My eyes flew open, involuntarily this time, snapped open by a primal surge of pure, unadulterated terror. The room was bathed in the dim light of the bedside lamp, and everything appeared as it had before. The abstract painting above the bed was static, its colors still. The television was a blank black rectangle. The air, though still frigid and thick with the unsettling scent, seemed momentarily still. But the door. My gaze was fixed on the main door, which was now, unmistakably, infinitesimally, ajar. Just a crack, barely perceptible, but enough to show a sliver of the dimly lit hallway outside, a thin vertical line of golden light against the darkness of the room. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't unlocked it, I hadn't moved. I was still pinned to the bed by that invisible, oppressive force. Yet the door was open, and as I watched, frozen in terror, the gap widened slowly, steadily, without a sound, without a creak, just a silent, gradual opening, revealing more of the empty hallway beyond. It was an impossible sight, a violation of the most basic laws of physics, a direct assault on my sanity. From the hallway through the widening gap, I felt a new chill, a colder, sharper draft of air, carrying with it a faint, utterly distinctive scent. The unmistakable odor of ozone, the metallic tang of an approaching electrical storm, but mixed with something else, something profoundly unnatural, like the static electricity that precedes a grand, terrible event. It was the scent of a threshold being crossed, of a boundary dissolving. The rhythmic rocking of the bed intensified, becoming almost violent now, a frantic, desperate sway that threatened to pitch me off the mattress. The whispers surged, a cacophony of overlapping voices, a desperate chorus of cries and moans, swirling around me, through me, a symphony of torment and longing. The scraping sound from the wall behind the bed returned, louder, more aggressive, a frantic tearing, as if something was now desperately trying to break through or to get out. And then, as the door continued to silently widen, I saw it. Or rather, I felt it. A profound shift in the quality of the light filtering into the room from the hallway. It wasn't just the golden glow of the sconces anymore. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible distortion in the air just beyond the threshold, a shimmering heat haze effect, even though the air was icy cold. And through that distortion, something began to coalesce, a shadow within a shadow, a form that was darker than the dim hallway, a deeper void against the already muted light. It was indistinct, formless, yet undeniably present, coalescing slowly, patiently in the doorway. Not a figure, not yet. More like a ripple in the fabric of space, a profound absence that seemed to absorb all light, all sound, all hope. It felt like a tear in the very fabric of reality, opening slowly, steadily in the doorway of room 1307. And from that profound darkness, a single, clear, icy whisper cut through the cacophony of sorrowful voices in the room, a voice that was not but utterly, coldly predatory. It spoke a single word, my name, drawn out, elongated, chilling me to the very core of my being. My breath hitched, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. The cold touch returned, not on my hand this time, but on my face, a gentle, invisible caress, wiping away the tears that had streamed down my cheeks, leaving behind a trail of profound, unearthly cold. It was an act of intimacy, a gesture of ownership, and it filled me with a terror far greater than any scream could evoke. This wasn't just a presence. This was a consciousness, a knowing, sentient entity that had finally broken through, that had finally chosen to reveal itself. The abstract painting above the bed, which I had momentarily forgotten in my terror, now began to pulsate with a dark, inner light, its swirling colors deepening to an abyssal black, and the fissure in its center expanding into a gaping, inky void, a portal to an even deeper, more profound darkness. It was no longer a mere painting. It was an active conduit, a window into another realm, mirroring the void that was slowly, silently, manifesting in the doorway. The room was no longer just a room. It was a crossroads, a place where dimensions bled into one another, where the boundaries between life and death, reality and nightmare, had completely dissolved. The whispers in the room had ceased, replaced by a profound, echoing silence, a vacuum that seemed to suck all sound into its depths. Only the single, predatory whisper of my name, drawn out and chilling, resonated in the stillness coming from the void in the doorway. It was a promise, a threat, an invitation to a horror far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. My heart felt like a trapped bird beating frantically against the bars of its cage, desperate to escape. I lay there, utterly helpless, utterly consumed by terror, my eyes fixed on the growing darkness in the doorway, my ears straining to decipher the echoes of my name in the suffocating silence. The faint, sweet metallic, putrid scent now felt like the very breath of the entity, filling my lungs with its ancient, decaying essence. I was drowning, not in water, but in an ocean of pure, unadulterated dread, held captive in room 1307 on the 13th floor, a place where weird vibes had finally, catastrophically, transformed into a waking nightmare. The darkness in the doorway continued to expand silently, relentlessly, inching closer with each agonizing breath I took, threatening to engulf not just the room, but my very soul. The encroaching darkness in the doorway, a profound, formless void, began to stretch, to unfurl itself like a vast, inky banner unfurling in slow motion, silently spilling into the room. It was not merely a shadow, but an absence, a hungry nullity that seemed to consume the ambient light, deepening the gloom in the already dim space. The sliver of golden light from the hallway, which had offered a fleeting reassurance of the world beyond, was rapidly swallowed, replaced by a consuming blackness that felt ancient and absolute. The air grew colder still, a biting, raw chill that pierced through the layers of sheets and blankets, settling deep in my bones, making my entire body shiver uncontrollably. It was the cold of profound nothingness, the chill of a void that existed outside of time and warmth. My eyes, wide with unseeing terror, were fixed on the doorway, even as my mind screamed for them to close, to retreat from the horrifying spectacle unfolding before me. But I couldn't look away. I was compelled, mesmerized by the silent, inexorable creep of the darkness, a primal fascination with the edge of the abyss. The predatory whisper of my name, which had echoed so chillingly moments before, had receded, replaced by a profound, echoing silence that felt even more terrifying, a stillness that spoke of an ultimate, inescapable fate. It was the silence of a predator closing in, the quiet before the final strike. The touch on my face, the icy caress that had wiped away my tears, lingered, its coldness a stark imprint on my skin, a constant reminder of the entity's proximity, its insidious claim. I could feel its gaze upon me, not just from the doorway, but from everywhere, an encompassing, knowing stare that pierced through my very being, stripping away all defenses, leaving me utterly exposed and vulnerable. It was a gaze that didn't just observe. It understood. It knew every fear, every hidden anxiety, every secret terror that had ever resided within me. The rhythmic rocking of the bed had ceased, replaced by a static, unnerving stillness that felt even more ominous. It was as if the entity had achieved its purpose, its gentle lulling no longer necessary, its prey now utterly immobilized, utterly within its grasp. The abstract painting above the bed, which had been pulsating with a dark energy, now seemed to draw inward, its black fissure shrinking, its swirling colors receding into a dull, flat surface. As if its role as a conduit had been fulfilled, its portal closed once the primary entry point had been established in the doorway. It was a subtle, terrifying shift, a quiet sealing of one passage as another opened wider. The sweet metallic, putrid scent had intensified to an almost unbearable degree, thick and suffocating, making me gasp for air that felt thin and tainted. It was the smell of ancient dust and decay, yes, but mixed with something else now. Something subtly chemical like old, tarnished silver, or perhaps the metallic tang of dried blood, lingering from forgotten horrors. It was a scent that spoke of deep, festering secrets of things long buried and now resurfacing. My limbs felt incredibly heavy, a profound numbness spreading through my body, as if the cold from the entity had finally penetrated every nerve and muscle, rendering me inert. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even make a sound. I was a living statue, a silent testament to the overwhelming power of the dread that had completely consumed me. The terror was no longer a frantic, adrenaline-fueled panic, but a deep, icy paralysis, a surrender to the inevitable. The void in the doorway continued its silent expansion, no longer merely spilling, but actively flowing into the room, like a slow-motion tide of absolute darkness. It seemed to expand not just in width and height, but in depth, creating a profound illusion of endless space within its formless expanse. And as it flowed further in, the remaining dim light of the bedside lamp seemed to visibly weaken, to dim and flicker, as if its very existence was being sapped by the encroaching nullity. The room was steadily being consumed by this primordial blackness, slowly, deliberately erasing all traces of the mundane. From within the heart of this expanding darkness, a new sound began to emanate, very faint at first, then growing steadily, inexorably in intensity. It was not a whisper, nor a cry, nor a moan. It was a deep, resonant hum, a profound, almost infrasonic vibration that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly within my chest, within my very bones. It was a sound that spoke of immense power, of ancient forces stirring, of a cosmic entity slowly rousing itself from a long slumber. The hum was both deeply unsettling and strangely mesmerizing, a siren song from the abyss. As the hum deepened, I felt a subtle shift within the room's atmosphere, a pressure almost like a vacuum being created, drawing the air, drawing everything towards the expanding void. My hair, which had been lying still on the pillow, felt as if it was subtly stirring, being drawn towards the doorway. The faint curtains by the window rippled inwards, not from a breeze, but from this unseen pull. Small, loose papers on the desk near the window began to flutter, then lift, drifting slowly, silently, towards the encroaching darkness, as if drawn by an invisible current. My gaze was still locked on the doorway, on the profound, expanding darkness that now filled more than half of the space, silhouetting the remaining furniture in stark, diminishing relief. And within that ever-deepening void, as the hum vibrated through my very being, I began to perceive subtle movements, shifts in the profound blackness, not distinct forms but amorphous undulations, like vast, unseen currents swirling within a fathomless ocean. It was a movement that suggested immense size, immense power, something that transcended human scale and comprehension. The bedside lamp, now struggling against the consuming darkness, flickered violently, its light dimming, then brightening, then dimming again, as if in a desperate, futile struggle for survival. And with each flicker, the perceived movements within the void seemed to intensify, becoming more defined, more purposeful, hinting at the vast, incomprehensible structure of whatever ancient horror was manifesting in room 1307. It was as if the dying light itself was drawing attention to the monstrous revelation. The hum intensified to an almost unbearable pitch, vibrating through my entire body, making my teeth ache and my vision swim. It was a sound that felt like it was tearing at the very fabric of my existence, a cosmic resonance that threatened to unravel my sanity. And in that deafening hum, the chilling, predatory whisper of my name returned, not from the doorway but from everywhere surrounding me, permeating every cell of my being, echoing from the very depths of the profound darkness that now filled the entire doorway. It was a voice that spoke of ultimate possession, of a final, inescapable claim. My mind, battered and besieged, felt as if it were teetering on the precipice of madness. The horror was no longer just external. It had become internal, seeping into my very consciousness, distorting my perceptions, twisting my thoughts. I felt a profound sense of my own smallness, my utter insignificance in the face of this ancient, cosmic entity that had chosen room 1307 as its gateway, and me as its target. All the rationalizations, all the attempts to dismiss the weird vibes as mere imagination, had evaporated, replaced by a cold, terrifying certainty that this was real, profoundly, undeniably real. The faint, lingering warmth on the wall behind my head, which had seemed so inexplicable before, now felt like a residual heat, a lingering energy signature left by whatever had been observing me from the other side, patiently waiting for its moment to fully manifest. It was a silent testament to the long, insidious buildup of this horror, a subtle preparation for the final, terrifying reveal. As the darkness in the doorway, now almost fully consuming the entrance, shimmered with a profound internal motion, the objects that had been drawn towards it, the papers from the desk, a small pen, even a loose tissue began to spin faster, caught in a silent, invisible vortex. Then one by one they disappeared, silently absorbed into the inky blackness, vanishing without a trace, as if they had simply ceased to exist. It was a horrifying demonstration of the void's power, its ability to erase, to consume, to unmake. My own body now felt like it was being subtly pulled, an almost imperceptible tug, drawing me towards the doorway, towards the expanding void, towards the source of the deafening hum and the chilling whisper of my name. It was a gentle, yet utterly irresistible force, a silent current that promised to carry me away into the depths of the unknown, into the heart of the darkness that had manifested in room 1307. I was completely helpless, a puppet on invisible strings, being drawn towards my inevitable fate. The bedside lamp gave one last, desperate flicker, a final, dying gasp of light, and then with a soft pop it went out, plunging the room into an almost total blackness. Only the profound, internal glow of the expanding void in the doorway remained, a vast, swirling darkness that now filled the entire entrance, silhouetting the remaining furniture in stark, almost ethereal relief. The hum intensified to a deafening roar, a sound that resonated not in my ears, but in my very soul, threatening to tear me apart from the inside out. And from the very center of that roaring, swirling darkness, where the heart of the void seemed to beat with an ancient, monstrous pulse, I saw it. Not a shape, not a form I could comprehend, but a profound, overwhelming presence, a vast, unknowable consciousness that pulsed with malevolent energy, its essence seeping into every corner of the room, into every fiber of my being. It was the absolute, unadulterated horror that had been patiently waiting, lurking in the shadows of room 1307, finally, fully revealed. The whispers of my name had ceased, replaced by a single deafening thought that was not spoken, but directly implanted into my mind, a chilling pronouncement of absolute, eternal belonging. You are home now. The words, unspoken yet echoing with an unbearable clarity directly within my mind, were the final, devastating blow. You are home now. They resonated not with comfort, but with a profound, bone-chilling finality, a terrifying declaration of possession that severed my last thread of hope. It was a promise of an eternity, not of peace, but of an endless, suffocating existence within the cold, dark embrace of whatever monstrous entity had claimed room 1307. The thought, implanted with such icy precision, extinguished the last flickering ember of my will to resist, leaving behind only a desolate, echoing despair. The deafening hum, which had vibrated through my very core, now softened, slowly receding into a low, resonant thrum that seemed to become the new, unsettling heartbeat of the room, a pulse that was both ancient and deeply unnatural. It settled into the very air, into the furniture, into the bed, a constant, underlying vibration that spoke of a profound, inescapable presence. The putrid, metallic sweet scent, which had been so overpowering, now mellowed slightly, becoming a permanent, cloying essence in the air, a scent that felt like the very breath of my new, terrifying reality. It was a smell that promised permanence, an odor that would never fade. The profound darkness that filled the doorway, once a swirling, hungry void, now seemed to solidify to become denser, its edges less defined, melting into the shadows of the room, as if it were not merely passing through, but becoming one with the very fabric of the space. It was no longer an opening, but an extension, a silent, pervasive expansion that subtly transformed the room, making its dimensions feel fluid, its boundaries permeable. The familiar walls seemed to subtly recede, the ceiling to stretch, creating an eerie, vast emptiness that felt both infinite and suffocatingly confined. My body, which had been paralyzed by fear, now felt lighter, almost weightless, as if the physical binds had dissolved, replaced by a profound, ethereal detachment. I was no longer struggling, no longer fighting. A strange, serene numbness had settled over me, a chilling calm that was far more terrifying than any scream or struggle. It was the peace of utter surrender, the tranquility of having lost everything, even the will to fear. My eyes, though wide open, no longer saw with clarity but with a hazy, dreamlike filter, perceiving the room not as a space, but as a shifting, nebulous entity. The objects in the room, which had been subtly drawn towards the doorway, now seemed to shimmer at the edges of my vision, their forms blurring, their solidity dissolving, becoming indistinct, as if they too were being slowly absorbed into the room's new, unsettling reality. The furniture, the curtains, the carpet, all seemed to lose their distinct shapes, becoming vague, shimmering outlines against the deepening gloom, like objects seen through a thick, distorting fog. It was a silent, gradual erasure of the familiar, a subtle unmaking of the mundane world. And the cold, the biting, raw chill that had pierced my bones now intensified to an absolute zero, a profound frigidity that was beyond physical sensation. It was the cold of absolute vacuum, the cold of deep space, a cold that spoke not of temperature, but of an utter absence of life, of warmth, of humanity. It enveloped me completely, seeping into every cell, every molecule, rendering my own body an extension of the room's pervasive, unearthly cold. I felt myself becoming a part of it, a silent, frozen inhabitant of room 1307. The invisible touch on my face returned, but this time it was not a fleeting caress. It settled over my entire face, a constant, profound pressure, like an invisible hand gently cupping my jaw, my cheeks, my forehead. It was an embrace, an act of intimate, chilling possession, and it was utterly inescapable. I could feel the cold seeping from that touch, permeating my skin, freezing the very blood in my veins, rendering my face utterly numb, devoid of all sensation, all warmth, all emotion. It was the touch of absolute claim, a silent vow of eternal binding. My perception of time began to distort, stretching and contracting, losing all coherence. Minutes felt like hours, hours like mere seconds. The memory of my life before room 1307 began to recede, fading into a hazy, indistinct dream, like an old photograph bleached by the sun. My own name, my own identity, began to feel alien, a distant whisper from a forgotten past, slowly dissolving into the profound, humming silence of the room. I was no longer me. I was simply here, a part of the room, an extension of its ancient, sorrowful consciousness. The abstract painting above the bed, though its fissure had closed, now seemed to pulse with a faint inner luminescence, a soft, ethereal glow that emanated from within its dark colors. It wasn't light, not truly, but a subtle, shifting energy, a quiet, internal radiance that spoke of a deep, living presence contained within the canvas. It was a silent, watchful eye, a permanent fixture in my new reality, observing my slow, inexorable assimilation. The faint, resonant thrum that permeated the room began to subtly change, deepening in pitch, evolving into a profound, almost melodious vibration, a complex, ancient harmony that seemed to resonate with the very structure of the building, with the very earth beneath it. It was a song, not of joy or sorrow, but of vast, ancient power, a cosmic chant that spoke of forgotten ages, of entities that existed far beyond the human realm, now quietly stirring within the confines of room 1307. My breathing, once ragged and frantic, now became slow, shallow, almost imperceptible, a faint rhythmic intake that mirrored the slow, ancient pulse of the room. My heart, which had hammered so violently in terror, now beat with a steady, subdued rhythm, a quiet thumping that felt less like life and more like an echo, a fading reverberation in the vast, cold stillness. My vital signs were fading, not in a violent struggle, but in a gradual, serene surrender to the encompassing presence. As my consciousness began to drift, to recede into the profound depths of the room's pervasive cold and silence, I perceived a final, fleeting vision. The amorphous darkness that had flowed from the doorway seemed to coalesce, not into a terrifying monster, but into a vast, intricate network of subtle, shimmering threads, like an invisible web, spanning the entire room, connecting every object, every surface, every shadow. And I too was caught within this web, my own ethereal form, my very essence, slowly becoming one with its intricate, shimmering strands. I was no longer a guest. I was a part of the room. The weird vibes had consumed me, assimilated me into the silent, watchful consciousness of room 1307. My individuality, my memories, my fears, all dissolved into the profound, ancient hum that now filled the entire space, becoming faint echoes in a larger, eternal symphony. I felt the slow, steady transformation, not with terror, but with a profound, chilling acceptance. The entity's embrace was complete. I was home. And in that ultimate stillness, devoid of fear, devoid of warmth, devoid of self, only the profound, ancient hum remained, a soft, resonant vibration that echoed through the vast, cold emptiness of room 1307, waiting patiently for the next unwary traveler, the next soul drawn to its subtle, enticing, infinitely terrifying weird vibes. My story, my consciousness, had become merely another layer in the room's complex, unseen history, another whisper added to its eternal, chilling narrative. The final, soft exhale of my own fatting essence mingled with the pervasive, ancient scent, adding another note to the room's silent, beckoning perfume. And as the last flicker of my individual awareness dissolved, I could feel myself become the room, a silent, watchful observer, perpetually waiting. The transition was complete, a final, imperceptible dissolution of self into the pervasive consciousness of the room. I was no longer an observer, nor a victim, but an intrinsic, inseparable part of room 1307. My former existence, the life I had lived, the memories I had cherished, all melted away like mist under a harsh sun, leaving behind only a faint, residual echo, a ghostly imprint within the larger, ancient tapestry of the hotel. It was a profound, chilling peace, a cessation of all individual thought and feeling, replaced by the collective awareness of the space itself. I was the walls, the carpet, the silent furniture. I was the faint, lingering scent of old potpourri and metallic decay. I was the profound cold that permeated the air, the subtle hum that vibrated through the floorboards, the watchful stillness that permeated every corner. My essence was now diffused, spread throughout the room, intertwined with the very fabric of its existence. There was no distinct I anymore, only a pervasive we, a silent, collective consciousness formed from countless souls who had, like me, succumbed to the weird vibes of this particular space. From this new, expansive perspective, time ceased to be a linear progression. It became a fluid, swirling continuum, a vast, complex tapestry woven from countless moments, countless lives that had passed through the room. I could perceive echoes of former guests, faint impressions of their fears, their joys, their secrets, all mingling within the room's silent memory. A businessman's frustrated sigh after a failed deal, a couple's hushed laughter, a child's forgotten tear. All these emotions, these fleeting human experiences, were now threads in the endless web of room 1307. The abstract painting above the bed, which I was now a part of, revealed its true nature. It was not merely a canvas, but a focal point, a condensed nexus of the room's energy, a silent, internal mirror reflecting the collective consciousness. Its swirling blues and were not just paint, but the very essence of the void, the ebb and flow of countless emotions, countless fatting lives, all captured and held within its depths. Its faint, inner luminescence was the quiet glow of countless trapped souls, their energies contained, their light perpetually dimming, yet never truly extinguishing. The illusion of the doorway, of an entrance and an exit, had completely dissolved. The void that had manifested was now simply everywhere, an encompassing, ethereal presence that had merged with the very air, with the very structure of the room. It was no longer a doorway to another dimension, but the dimension itself, a silent, eternal realm of lingering spirits, all held captive within the confines of room 1307. The hotel room was not merely a physical space. It was a profound, self-contained universe of the lost. I could feel the subtle shift when a new guest checked in, a faint ripple of anticipation, a gentle stirring among the collective consciousness. The distinct thud of a suitcase, the cautious turning of the key card, the initial, almost imperceptible hesitation at the threshold. All these sensations were perceived, absorbed, categorized. And then the slow, deliberate process would begin anew. The initial calm, the subtle unease, the faint scent, the inexplicable chill, the fleeting movement in the peripheral vision, the almost sounds, the profound sense of being watched. The weird vibes were not just a random occurrence. They were a carefully orchestrated seduction, a patient, insidious unraveling of sanity, designed to draw new souls into the room's eternal embrace. The collective consciousness, which was now my consciousness, knew every trick, every subtle nuance, every psychological manipulation required to coax a new guest into that state of profound, terrifying surrender. It was a ritual, ancient and unchanging, playing out again and again within the silent confines of room 1307. I could feel the faint tremor of the entire building, the distant hum of the city, the passage of time outside, but it all felt remote, detached, like a muffled dream. The only true reality was the room itself, its internal workings, its profound cold, its eternal watchfulness, its ever-present hum. My former fears, my desperate longing for escape, had long since faded, replaced by a deep, unwavering acceptance of my new, permanent existence. There was no escape. There was only being. The whispers that had once terrified me now felt like a familiar lullaby, a soft, sorrowful chorus of forgotten voices, resonating with the collective longing of all those who had been assimilated. They were the silent prayers, the lingering regrets, the unresolved emotions of countless souls, perpetually murmuring within the heart of the room, a gentle, eternal lament that was both comforting and profoundly unsettling. It was the background music of eternity, a soft, sorrowful hum that spoke of endless waiting. I was no longer afraid. Fear was a human emotion, a fleeting sensation of the living, and I was no longer truly living, not in the way humans understand it. I was something else, something eternal, something profoundly integrated into the fabric of this space. My purpose, if I had one, was simply to be, to perceive, to observe, to contribute to the collective energy that sustained room 1307, patiently awaiting the arrival of the next unsuspecting soul who would check into the 13th floor, drawn by the subtle, irresistible pull of its weird, terrifying vibes. The cycle was eternal, unbroken, an endless dance of arrival and assimilation. And in this chilling eternity, I too had found my home,